Some films were harmed in the making of this podcast. Everybody, and welcome to 2018 and what is ostensibly our second anniversary episode of For Your Consideration, which, like last year, we are doing as an episode of All Things Considered.
The podcast where we ask you to consider all things as opposed to just looking at a single masterpiece or museum piece for your consideration.
Now, technically, the show's anniversary is officially at the end of the month, but since we wanted to sort of do our best of 2017 and do kind of our anniversary, we thought we'll just do it all as the All Things Considered episode, and we'll do it earlier in the month rather than later. We'll probably do a shout-out on the episode that actually does sort of correspond to the anniversary, but this is the actual celebration. Commence au festival.
That's pretty janky there, Mike.
So I hope everybody had a good holiday. We're going to start this episode out pretty similar to how we did the 2016 wrap-up year-end, which was just do kind of like a year-in review for the show. And then once we're done talking about that for like 10 or 15 minutes, we're going to go into our Best of 2017, which is not the same as everybody else's Best of 2017 lists, because our list can encompass any film from any time, any period, as long as it was watched by one of us in 2017.
So we will ignore the coincidence that Mike just happens to have seen a lot of films from 2017, and he decided to make that the theme of his list.
One of two themes in my list, and yeah, when I put my list together, like 6 of the movies were 2017 movies, and I thought, I can come up with 4 more movies from 2017 and just do a 2017 list. So they were the ones that I saw, and they were my favorite from the year. That's on me.
I feel it was very awkwardly worded. Explanation that hurt the explanation.
My life is awkwardly worded. So looking back on this last year, we've had a couple of events, a couple of benchmarks that were sort of hit. One of our goals that we stated in 2016 was to put out episodes more regularly, which we did. Starting, I think, with Eraserhead was the first episode that launched our weekly schedule. Since May of 2017, we have produced an episode at least weekly. We've sometimes actually put out more than one episode. This episode actually normally would have been released on the 31st, but we wanted to wait, and the holidays and things going on, so...
We were in different provinces, stuff like that.
Yeah, so this one's, technically coming out still within that week, but it's coming out a little bit later. We're probably still going to be releasing on Monday our next episode as we normally do, so you're going to get kind of 2 fairly close together. I think, I was going to mention something, but it kind of feeds into something that I consider something that I want to discuss.
He's going to save his segue for later.
I'm going to save it.
Segue as a segue for this segue.
So the schedule was one of the big things that happened to us this year, one of the goals that we sort of hit. Another interesting thing that happened this year was we introduced new shows. There was the Sound Considerations soundtrack show that I started, which...
blew out of control pretty quickly.
Yeah, it like the In Case You Were Considering that Dustin does solo, the Sound Considerations that I do solo was supposed to be like a 10, 12-minute podcast, just like a microcast. And I haven't put out another one because I've been trying to figure out how to get that under control. Whereas Dustin, on the other hand, we've had 3 or 4 episodes of In Case You Were Considering.
I believe it's 4 at this point.
Krampus the Christmas Devil.
That is the mistake I made when I went to go watch it.
Being our Christmas episode this year. Yeah, I think these microcasts are kind of a great idea because, most of our episodes run just over half an hour to an hour. The microcast gives us an opportunity to tackle some other things and just kind of put something more bite-sized out there, which, as a podcast listener myself, I appreciate sometimes just having like a 15-minute podcast rather than having to sit through 2 hours of somebody discussing, the intricacies of Frank Herbert's Dune or something.
I'm trying to think up a line from Weird Al about discussing the oeuvre of Mr. Rob Schneider. I feel that there was a wasted opportunity for a joke there, and you went with Frank Herbert's Dune instead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You should be.
I'm terribly sorry. Another ancillary show that we kind of introduced was the Conversations, which was an interview show. We're trying to get more interviews. We want to talk to more people within and around the industry. First interview was with Alan Dean Foster, who's a very prolific novelization writer and novelist in his own right. And he's best known for writing the original Star Wars novelization and countless others. So that was kind of an exciting thing in 2017. It was really fun expanding the horizons of the show, growing the show. And speaking of expanding and growing...
The Expanse is a great series everyone should watch.
Everyone should watch The Expanse. But our YouTube channel was a big surprise this year. We kind of just started it as just another outlet. It's like trying to get as much traffic as you can from every platform you can, but it's really kind of blossomed and there's a lot of community happening there.
It's the only place we've got comments.
We're getting tons of comments on various films, not just The Thing now. That's been really cool to see. So that's something that we may try cultivating as we go forward in our third year here. But before we talk about what we want to do moving forward, Dustin, I'm curious, looking back, are there any fave episodes? I know you were really looking forward to Eraserhead when we did our last anniversary show.
Martyrs. I was very excited about the discussion with Martyrs that we went on and on and on about.
Martyrs was a good episode. It's one of my favorite episodes that we did. It's one of my favorite movies that we did.
And I especially love how it's a compare and contrast with something that was just so opposite of what it was. I love being able to compare and contrast, which is one of the things I love about October, and one of the things that's generally unfortunate when it comes to looking at a single movie in sort of a vacuum, which is what we do.
It is easier to compare and contrast, and I do really enjoy our Octobers because it does sort of give us an opportunity to branch out and do some movies that we wouldn't normally get to cover. You don't get a lot of horror movies on the cinematic masterpiece lists that are out there.
Nor a lot of comedies.
That's true. That's very true.
I'd actually have to look at the number of actions, but yes, drama is the one that will always take it home.
Martyrs was a high point for me. Another high point for me, which I think actually damaged our audience, was November's Starship Troopers month, because it gave us an opportunity to kind of just break down an entire franchise. As the conversations went from movie to movie, I thought they grew, they evolved, and being able, you were talking about comparing and contrasting and cross-referencing, and that was something that we really got to do all through November. And while I will swear to the fact that we lost probably half our audience in November, I'm still actually proud of those episodes, and I thought it was really fun going through those movies.
I'll agree, though, there was some burnout. Especially
we were doing 2 episodes a week.
Especially watching all of Roughnecks at the same time. Get an entire TV series behind that. But don't worry, we won't subject you guys to that kind of thing.
It's a learning process. We've learned our lesson. So we talked about favorite episodes. Were there any surprises as we went along this past year?
Not really. I don't tend to get surprised much anymore by most anything.
Last year you said that you were surprised by a number of the movies that we covered, finding that you liked them when you didn't think you would, or a movie like The Graduate, which you said you'd heard so much good things about it, and then when we watched it you were really kind of nonplussed.
And now going into year 2, I'm expecting that kind of thing, so I can't be surprised anymore by that.
Fair enough.
We hit a movie like Close Encounters, and when I come out nonplussed, as you would say, that's just me looking at it with new eyes. And the magic's gone, Mike. The magic's gone.
It's like don't eat at the restaurant that you work at.
Yeah, you eat at the restaurant you work at. You make it yourself, your way, and it's cheaper because you usually get it comped or for free.
So is there anything that you're looking forward to in year 3? We've talked about a lot of different things. Some of them we are going to tell the folks out in podcast listening world. But I'm actually kind of excited personally for year 3 because of the things that we've talked about.
I'm looking forward to heading out to the movies more often for our All Things Considered episodes.
What Dustin's referring to is we've kind of made a decision that out of our, 78 or 79 episodes that we've released, 9 of them are All Things Considered episodes. And we wanted to do a little bit more of the open review shows. And we also wanted to bring in newer movies that are actually in current release. So we're going to make a point of, going out to the movies, reviewing something that's recently released, having it on the show, and having at least one episode in the month being an All Things Considered episode.
And throwing in a couple other movies that we've seen and sort of moving our shout-outs to those episodes, the housekeeping sort of thing.
Yeah, all the viewer mail kind of stuff, the shout-outs for the comments that people give us. Anything that's not a strict kind of masterpiece or museum piece discussion, we're going to move to the All Things Considered, since it will be a more regular fixture in our podcasting schedule.
It'll be our variety show.
There may even be dancing.
Much like Meet the Feebles, which we may be doing an audio commentary on.
Which is another good thing to bring up, because one of the things that we said we wanted to do more in 2017 was audio commentaries. And I think only one got done, and we've talked about it, and there's been requests for them. We just haven't really gotten around to them because we've been sort of acclimating ourselves to...
Because we've been excuses. Excuses.
But it is something we've kind of dedicated ourselves to doing more of, so audio commentaries is something that we're going to try and get on, and the current movies, and guests.
Just like last year, more guests, try to get some crossovers with other podcasts going on. Get Kat to help us finish off the Lord of the Rings trilogy and move on to Cleopatra.
Kat's pretty strongly she wants to do Cleopatra, yeah.
She would kill us if we did it without her, that's for sure.
And that's not hyperbole.
She knows where we live.
She listens to the show. She'll find out. So yeah, a lot of things to look at in 2018, this next year coming up, and some stuff that we haven't mentioned that we're still kind of just discussing in a behind-the-scenes sort of way, which could be fun.
It happens when it happens.
It happens when it happens.
Best not to make promises and break them, I find.
So that's going to wrap up our look back at the year in FYC for 2017. And the next segment, of course, is going to be our big top 10 favorite?
10 favorites. 10 favorites is more accurate.
10 favorites.
That we happen to remember at this point in time.
Times 2, because it's both of our 10 favorites.
So 17 movies.
So 20 favorites. Oh, wait, no, because, dude, 17 movies for 2017? Really? Did we pull that off completely by accident?
There was some crossover in our favorite films.
I'm excited. This actually...
Mike is sometimes easily excited.
we couldn't have planned this better. So, without further ado, let us move on to our top 17 of 2017, the Mike and Dustin year-end roundup.
Experience the film, the game.
Enjoy. So it turns out 3 of the movies that Dustin and I have chosen overlap. So we're going to start with one of those movies. Our midpoint will be in one of those movies, and we will finish with one of those movies. Usually, Dustin, you go first when we're doing analysis, so how about you choose which of the 3 we start with?
In that case, given that we're also going in no particular order, we will start with Wonder Woman. The 2017 film, as directed by Patty Jenkins, is definitely one of, if not the best superhero film to come out. Quite frankly, especially given the slew that we've had over the last several years with all the Marvel films.
In so many ways, I feel like Wonder Woman could be, even though it's a superhero movie and just kind of this big budget adventure movie, it could potentially be one of the most important films of the 21st century, because here's a film where a female director is given a big budget studio blockbuster to helm. It's got all the support that is normally put behind one of these things.
And it's got a female lead that they've been avoiding for the longest time in an action film, and she knocks it out of the park.
It's a record-breaking movie. It, in its content, has a wonderful message. There's so many things in this movie that just step in all the right directions. And so many of the people working behind the scenes were women as well. It speaks so well for so many things as far as like storytelling.
And it doesn't fall into all the tropes that we've been seeing. It's not darky dark everywhere. It's not all color faded and browns. In fact, she jokes about that as they're going towards World War I. It's like, man, this is all ugly.
It's not like this movie itself is, the Citizen Kane of superhero movies, but
because Citizen Kane wasn't that good, but this one was.
But just the fact that here's a movie that's generally entrusted to men. Here, women were given an opportunity to come out and do their thing and proved that this is not an exclusive male club, that there is an audience out there, that there are people who are doing exemplary work in this industry who have ovaries. If this movie starts something, that will just be glorious. And that's why I think it has the potential to be one of the more important films of the 21st century.
Though I will also have the reservation, I forget which critic, director, star, whatever, said this, but she said she'll be impressed when they give a multi-million-dollar blockbuster to a female director who then bombs it, and they give her the chance again and again and again, like you see with certain other directors who will remain completely nameless.
I was going to mention that. I'm glad you did mention that. Because it's true. It's true. I mean, as much as this is a glowing example, ultimately it's when it fails, if they're willing to do it again.
There's a lot riding on it, unfortunately. Some heavy burden, a lot of pressure.
But it's still exciting. It's still exciting, and it's just such a wonderful movie. And one of my favorite, and apparently a lot of people's favorite cinematic moment of 2017 is Wonder Woman walking onto no man's land.
Everybody agrees with that.
Just a great moment overall.
So if you haven't seen the movie, at the very least, see that moment.
I was trying to screen capture that moment because somebody asked that question on Twitter and I wanted to post the image and I couldn't find the right image. So I popped my Blu-ray and I was trying to screen cap it, and for some reason it wasn't working, and I ended up watching that scene like 7 freaking times, and every time I got goosebumps. I was like, this scene really works in all aspects. Like, it's firing on all cylinders. It's such a great superhero moment.
But this isn't all things considered with quite the list, so we're going to have to move on before it turns into a whole review of Wonder Woman.
All right, so I guess I'll take the next one. And since we're talking about movies that have sort of backdoor social relevance, I'm going to throw Get Out into the fray. This was a 2017 thriller suspense horror directed by Jordan Peele. And I mean, everybody's probably seen this by now except for Dustin.
It's true.
While I do think it goes a little batshit crazy at the end, I think it earns it. It's just so well done. And it's one of these examples of you don't need $300 million to make a movie that really compels an audience. It's well written, it's well executed, it's well directed, it's well acted. It's got some great tension, it's got some humor, and it's got social relevance. It's not subtle about it, but it's not like a sledgehammer to the head about it. It's just the right amount of poking you in the eye and saying, hey.
I've heard nothing but good things about Get Out, and I have been wanting to see it for sure. When I get the opportunity, I'll be right on that. Definitely
worth checking out if you haven't checked it out already. As much as I loved Keanu, it's like 10 times better than Keanu. Yeah, so that's my number 2 for 2017. Dustin?
My number 2 for 2017, after having seen Martyrs, I went out and I checked out all of Pascal Laugier's other films, and The Tall Man, his 2012 entry into his filmography.
That was his follow-up to Martyrs, wasn't it?
I believe so. I wasn't as big a fan of Saint-Ange, but The Tall Man I definitely enjoyed. The things that I most enjoyed about it was that it had that same sort of tonal shift that you saw in Martyrs midway through. It had a mystery that seemed very supernatural at first, but then when it came in with the truth, it all worked so very nicely. I know it wasn't very highly rated, but it's one of those movies where it's like, why not?
I get why it wasn't highly rated, because it does have some clunkiness, but I really do wonder, I mean, we talked about this after I had seen it, and we were wondering if Laugier was perhaps writing to a North American audience and being a little overt or obvious. Because if this movie fails in any way, it's in how it sometimes
explains too much.
Yeah, that's probably the best way to put it. It has those tonal shifts, like you said. It has a great ending. It has an amazing ending.
It certainly threw me when the ending came about. And that's one of the things that I loved. Any sort of mystery, especially one that's supposed to be a horror mystery that surprises, is something that gets points.
And it's so great when you're watching a movie that you think you know what you're watching, and then you find out that you're not watching what you think you're watching.
And it brings up a lot of questions about morality as well, which is something that I always enjoy in a film.
Yeah, there's almost as much discussion between us after watching The Tall Man as we had after watching Martyrs. It's
That I will disagree with.
Well, it's
unless you include the fact that we also talked about Martyrs while we were talking about the Tall Man.
It's a little less visceral than Martyrs. He's definitely going for something a little more
cerebral, atmospheric,
palatable to a wider audience. But he's still not relinquishing, the things that make Logier's films so Logier. But yeah, that's a good pick. That's a really good pick.
And bringing the ball back into your court?
Well, as I said, this is favorite movies we've seen in 2017, so just because it's on the list doesn't necessarily mean that it is the creme de la creme or that there aren't better films out there. And that's my little preface as I go to my number 3, which is Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets, which it got a lot of shit from people because there's a lot going on. There's so much going on, and it's not The Fifth Element, but it's still a Luc Besson movie, and part of what I love about it is that there's so much going on. It kind of demands multiple viewings. That was kind of what I was looking for in this past year. Like, there's so much out there now that's just the middle of the road, anemic, make everybody happy movies that Disney and Marvel and Lucasfilm and everybody are producing.
I like how all of those are now owned by Disney.
They're all owned by Disney, I know.
And they're also very safe. That is the thing.
Yeah, they're designed to be safe, and Valerian is not safe. It's actually a little bugfuck nuts. And I love that about it. And it's visually amazing, and it's super kinetic. It's got some great cameos and some decent performances, and it's Luc Besson going back into sci-fi. So it's not, a perfect film. Like I said, it doesn't resonate the same way that a movie like The Fifth Element resonates. The Fifth Element, it gestates a little more. It's a slower boil. It eases you into the ideas a little bit more. And I think with this one, Besson probably assumed that the audience was kind of ready for just, this is what I'm going to give you and keep up. This is a movie that comes to the table and doesn't care if you keep up. So that was my number 3. Dustin, what is your number 3 for 2017?
Okay. Following Mike's little spiel about how it's not necessarily the best film in the world, I'm going to throw in it's not the best film in the world, and I'm actually going to go with 1993's sci-fi directed by Richard Compton. Can you guess what it is? Babylon 5.
The Gathering?
The Gathering.
The original pilot film?
The original pilot film.
Wow.
And now I get to explain why I went with that. First off, it introduced me again to Babylon 5, which I haven't seen in many a year, and I've been grinding through that hardcore in the last couple weeks and very much enjoying it. But it also stands out for me because I've seen a number of films that were meant to kickstart a TV series, and they're all bad. They're all cheesy. None of them really fit with the tone that the show goes for, and they just don't work. But this one does. It actually manages to keep the tone of the series, at least the first season's tone. And yes, it's cheesy. Yes, Commander Sinclair, like the way he speaks is super chiseled jaw, 70s star captain, very Zap Brannigan. And it can be silly, but it's still good. The way they treat a lot of things in the series, I very much enjoy. It's not a bunch of Planet of the Hats when it comes to aliens. Because Babylon 5 itself is pretty much an embassy, everybody's ambassadors. So you don't have a whole lot of the same issues that you have with aliens all being, okay, these are all warriors because they're Klingons and that's all they ever do. You see what everyone does on a political sense, and so they can focus more on story instead of starship battles. But at the same time, it has a lot of good starship battles, and it's supposed to be hard sci-fi, and it actually makes sense. They're not, the tech is too techs, we have to tech up the tech now. They're very subtle about it. There's a lot of things about the movie and the series that I've been really enjoying. And so I'm going with Babylon 5.
I almost feel like we should ask the judges for a ruling on this. Because the movie it has never had a theatrical presentation.
Made for TV movie. That is right. I'm bringing it.
But seeing as how it's our anniversary,
and it's about the films that give us joy.
This is true.
That's right.
I remember watching it at the time. I remember I've revisited it a couple of times, and it's a little clunky, but I dig me some Babylon 5, so
It doesn't have the same problems the Doctor Who movie had, the same terrible problems the Witchblade movie had. There's a lot of made-for-TV films to kickstart a franchise that did it wrong, and this one did it right. I wanted to get some recognition for that, at the very least.
B5 represent! Yeah. Alright, and my number 4 is a movie that I think I've discussed on the show before, which is The Little Hours by Jeff Baena, and it's a quirky little 2017 comedy that I went to see and thought was just freaking hilarious. It's a convent in the Middle Ages. Alison Brie, Kate Micucci, and Aubrey Plaza play nuns. Dave Franco plays this servant guy who runs away from his previous master and gets taken in by John C. Reilly in a great John C. Reilly performance. It's all done with sort of modern language, but everything else is Middle Ages, and it's based on the Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio. It's just one of those things where you don't really know what you're getting when you go in, and it's just sort of delightful. It's a very delightful movie. It's very black comedy. It goes in some weird places. It can be a little crass and a little silly. I personally don't think I see enough good comedies. So many comedies are just the dumb, usual factory churned out pieces of dreck that we get. And this thing really stood out. Even though I've talked about it before on the show, I'm throwing it out there again because it was one of my favorites. And I think it's one of the best of 2017. I said it.
Well, speaking of movies you've already talked about on the show, my next movie will be 2016's post-apocalyptic zombie horror drama directed by Colm McCarthy, The Girl with All the Gifts. After you talked about it, I went out and watched it, and I enjoyed it.
Because it's badass.
It reminds me a lot of The Last of Us, actually.
Yeah.
If you want to see The Last of Us turn into a movie, this is as close as you're getting until they actually do that.
It's like a little Last of Us and a little 28 Days Later.
And it is done very well. It's especially with how many zombie movies that exist, especially in the last 10 years. It is always nice to see something that, even though we're saying is so very much like The Last of Us, including the cordyceps, it's still nice to see something that's original, something that's different, something that sticks out. And this one is all of that. Going into, once again, the morality of how we treat each other, especially in this kind of scenario.
It's another one of those examples of a movie that knows exactly what it's trying to do, doesn't overreach. And it's not like a big budget horror movie, but they still hit all the right buttons, and they still make all the right steps.
And they still make you wonder what's going to happen until the very end.
I've heard the film is actually better than the book. The person who wrote the screenplay, Mike Carey, he also wrote the book that it was based on. I've been curious to read the book for a while, but if anybody out there has read it and knows,
let us know, because we don't.
Be sure to comment. Yeah, there's that. I don't remember the actress's name who plays the young girl, but she was just so good. Everybody in this movie was so good. Patty Considine.
Any movie that I enjoy that features children a whole lot, it's definitely well acted, because I generally don't like kids in movies.
So we're kind of officially in the middle of our list. We're going to hit another movie that Dustin and I have both picked. I'm going to pick this one since you picked the first one. I'm going to go with Logan, 2017's Logan, as directed by James Mangold. And this is a movie that got a lot of attention. This is the second superhero movie on our list. 2 superhero movies making our best of lists.
To be fair, there's like a million of them now.
That's true. That is true. But we were just talking about how safe so many of these movies are. And Logan is a movie that, honestly, I think it's not as amazing as everyone thinks it is. But it is so far away and above the safe that we get from Marvel Studios.
It even commits the cardinal sin of being rated R instead of PG-13.
And rated R, like James Mangold even said, when he went for that rated R, he wasn't going for it in the same context as like Deadpool. Deadpool wanted to make the dirty jokes and, drop the F-bomb and do the whatever. But an R rating, it just means
he can be real with it. When you're a guy whose special power is you heal, and your other special powers that you have claws, when you fight people, they're going to get hurt. There's going to be a bit of blood.
And you can deal with more mature subjects. I mean, this is a movie about old men. And what happens when this young kid comes into the mix. It's a really well-told story. I mean, I'd be shocked if no one has seen this movie already who's like a movie lover or a superhero lover. And, I've been talking for a long time. Marvel has been struggling to get the FF and the X-Men back from Fox for years. I say, well, I guess it's a moot point now because Disney owns them.
Disney does. And you can bet that Disney's not going to really do very many R-rated movies, and certainly none that kill off characters that everybody loves. That is not the Disney way.
But one of the things I loved about
Jack Sparrow.
One of the things that I loved about what Fox was doing with these movies, Fantastic Four, Fantastic, love it or hate it, it tried to do something different, and the studio fucked with it, and that second half of it was a bit of a mess. But that earlier character building stuff, it's not terrible. It's actually kind of compelling. The X-Men movies, they can be hit or miss, but there's more hit than miss. The New Mutants that's coming out is going to be a horror movie. Logan is like this road movie western thing, and they're killing off a character. And Deadpool is like this crazy
it's almost like 410 to Yuma, actually, if you think about it.
310 to Yuma.
310 to Yuma.
It's directed by the same director.
It's like that train that has to go to Yuma, and they got to get to the train, but there's people in the way between them and the train to Yuma, which is also a good film.
And I just love the fact, Legion on TV. Like, Fox is doing weird stuff with these characters that they own.
They have cojones.
And it's so much braver than what Marvel is doing. So it doesn't surprise me that Logan is there. I'm actually a fan of the Wolverine as well.
Which I have not seen.
I really liked what they did there. And so to have, like, the same team going from the Wolverine to Logan, there was a nice continuation of the story, and there's things that they brought in that spoke to elements from that previous movie and just kind of tied things up, and it's just beautifully done. It's just a good movie.
Made me have the feels and the cares.
And great performance by Hugh Jackman and Patrick Stewart.
Oh yeah, Patrick Stewart's always great.
Oh, and that kid. God, I wish I could remember that little kid's name. She was amazing. X-23?
Good old X-23.
So that's our number 5?
Which then bounces back to me.
That it does.
And I've brought this movie up before, and I'll bring it up again. But the 2015 Jason Krawczyk, He Never Died. I finally got Mike to see it. Finally. And it's still good, and it will always be good. Although he did not enjoy it quite so much as I do.
I loved it. I thought it was great. I still think that Seven Psychopaths is a better black comedy than He Never Died, which I believe Dustin still has not seen.
It's on the list. It's on the list.
I know.
It's a big list.
It's funny because I was just listening to our previous episode where we talked about He Never Died and Seven Psychopaths, so I thought it was hilarious that you brought it up now so that I could throw out that that comment. Because you declared that He Never Died was the best black comedy of all time, so had to challenge that.
I might have. That sounds like something I'd say.
But it is great, and Henry Rollins is so good in that movie.
I'd love to see that turn into the TV show that they were talking about.
And when you first posted your review of He Never Died, we actually got a retweet from Jason Krawczyk, which was nice.
Thank you, Jason, assuming you listen to this.
He probably doesn't. Do you have anything more to say about that movie, or have you...
Oh, I've said it all before, and I will say it again. Watch that movie. It is hilarious.
Fair enough. And for my next movie, I'm going back to the well, another movie that I've mentioned on the show before, but I still think deserves a little more credit. Alien Covenant. 2017 film, directed by Ridley Scott. This movie continues the stuff that was going on in Prometheus. It tried to be a little bit more conventional and give the fans kind of what they wanted with more of an alien movie, but they were still pushing a lot of crazy ideas and still pushing the David and Walter thing and the who created the alien and the engineers and what's David been doing on Paradise all this time for 10 years, and it's got a lot of thrills and chills, and it's beautifully shot, and it continues the alien story. And I think a lot of the people who are against this movie are resistant to the fact that Ridley Scott was kind of taking the franchise back, and they're afraid that the physiology that we're so accustomed to with the alien, what we understand about the alien, is being rewritten, and there may not be an alien queen, and David may be the cause of the alien as we know it, and people don't like that. People don't want the James Cameron movie accidentally erased from canon. They're perfectly happy to have the Fincher movie erased from canon, and the Genet movie erased from canon, and the AVP movies erased from canon, but don't you touch aliens. Even though the film was basically being given back to the original filmmaker who started the franchise. So
I feel that those would be the ones that you'd probably want to keep.
And it's still up in the air as to whether we're going to get the next Alien movie. I really hope we do, because from what Ridley Scott was saying, this whole thing is building to kind of a War of the Worlds. We were going to get to see more about the engineers. I think people read into some comments that he made online about how the whole thing about the origin of the alien is kind of done. I don't think he was saying that the story is done. I think he was just saying the alien creature itself, there's just not much more we can say about it. We need to talk about the other things going on in this universe. And the way that movie ends, like, we need another one. We need to know what happens with the Covenant. We need to know what happens with David and those poor people trapped in the life pods. So that's my feelings. Alien Covenant, underrated standout of 2017.
And let's face it, the alien is a great serial killer for a slasher film, but like all slasher films, you don't want it to just be about the alien. They're cool, I accept this. Xenomorphs are awesome. I love them as much as you do. But the best alien movies don't have them as the central focus after the first one.
The first movie was a haunted house. The second movie was a siege movie. These movies have the capacity to be different things. So as long as, like you said, as long as the story keeps going, as long as the characters keep developing.
We don't need this to turn into slasher films.
That was a huge criticism of this movie, is that it did play out very much like a Friday the 13th. People getting killed in showers, people walking off to have a cigarette and getting, like, whacked. But I was okay with that as being the framework for the movie, because I think that was consciously done.
That was done for the fans. They needed more Alien, I guess. But we could argue back and forth all day as to what they did and why. I think we just ask Ridley Scott. He's probably written about it.
And ultimately, we could argue about it, but you'd probably be wrong.
Sounds like something I would do. I do like talking out of my ass. And speaking of talking out of my ass, I'm going to move on to my next film, 400 Days, as directed by Matt Osterman. 2015 sci-fi, which...
I remember seeing that, like, on a movie shelf or whatever and thinking, I might want to watch that movie.
And I think it's worth watching, despite the fact that Dane Cook is in it, in a starring role.
That may be why I didn't watch it.
The basic premise is they're sort of locked away in a bit of an experiment for 400 days, and they stop getting communication from above ground, and things start going wrong. And so you're of course wondering, well, was this part of the test? Did something actually go wrong? They get out, and at the end of the day, I'm not too sure one way or the other. But I do remember the entire time enjoying what was going on. I always enjoy claustrophobic movies, very small sets, movies where people are forced to just react to each other and the situations around them.
So like Batman versus Superman.
Would you call that claustrophobic?
I'm just being a dick.
That felt like... I don't get where you're going here.
Having not seen the movie, I can't really comment on it at all, so I'm just trying to contribute.
But I find the best terror comes from uncertainty and comes from limitation. With limitation, you have so much more to work with. As dumb as that sounds. I find...
It makes sense.
There's the burden of choice where you have too many options and you end up not choosing anything. When you're given this small set of tools, you'll put them together in far more interesting ways. And I've always loved movies that occur in such small spaces for that.
And for my next film, this is a movie that I think has made it onto a lot of people's lists, and that is Denis Villeneuve's Blade Runner 2049. This thing is just gigantic and beautiful and sweeping and atmospheric and touching and deep and thought-provoking, and it's everything you want in a Blade Runner movie, and just so grossly underrated. People did not go to see this thing. I'm one of them who didn't. I don't know why we're surprised that people didn't go to see this thing, because in 1982 people didn't go to see Blade Runner.
They went to see E.T.
Yeah, they went to see E.T. And I was trying to think of what people went to see instead of Blade Runner. I don't know if it was like Fate of the Furious or something. I'll have to like check the dates, but this is just...
Maybe just nobody thought it could be done.
I think the movie probably is conceivably 20 minutes too long, but it's not really a problem. Like, it would just tighten it up a little bit the experience would just be a little bit shorter. You wouldn't be lingering on some of the panoramas and the visuals so long. But so much of what made kind of Blade Runner was the panoramas and the visuals, so I kind of don't mind them taking that time. There's just so much going on thematically, and it's one of those movies where, again, you think you're watching a certain movie and then it doesn't necessarily go the way you expect it to go, and it does so in a very satisfying way. And, that might be a theme of all of the movies that I'm listing, is that you kind of expected them to go a certain way and they don't.
Pleasant surprises are nice. We can't all just go to movies that are the film equivalent of Nickelback, where you know what the next verse is going to be before Chad Kroeger says it.
For all intents and purposes, like Valerian, Little Hours, even Wonder Woman, Logan, like these are all movies where you kind of went in with expectations and they sort of defied those expectations and they exceeded those expectations in a way that you didn't expect. Blade Runner was kind of the king of that. I mean, Harrison Ford doesn't even come into the movie for like over an hour. People basically thought that Deckard was going to be like running around with Kay for the whole movie, and it's like there's a slow build to it. This is a movie that doesn't mind taking its time. This is a movie that's like, it's another one of those movies that just comes to the table and it doesn't care what you want and what you think. It's like, you're here for an experience and I'm going to deliver an experience. And Denis Villeneuve, this is a guy at the top of his game. Like, Arrival blew my mind. It was going to be on the list before I switched to all 2017 movies. So well done. And the guy's just, this is the guy. I mean, there's talk about him doing a Dune remake. I'm in. Whatever this guy wants to do next, I'm in. Blade Runner 2049, if you haven't seen it, it's coming out on Blu-ray soon. Take the time. Watch it. And just let it kind of, just soak it in. Let it take you away.
I still want to see Jodorowsky's Dune. Or the Metabarons. I want to see that nonsense put the film.
If you've read the Metabarons, you basically have Jodorowsky's Dune, but god damn, it'd be amazing to have the Metabarons movie or TV series or something.
It would make no sense the entire time. No one would have any clue what's going on. It would be awesome. Having the bidding war with the Techno Pope, which is dumb as balls, and then the guy just makes up a number to bribe him with. 1 billion trillion credits. That's not even a number. But the look on his face, he believes in that number. Which is a terrible way to segue to my next film, Train to Busan, the 2016 South Korean zombie film directed by Yeon Sang-ho, which I probably mispronounced. It's another film that's combining two of the things that I enjoyed this list. One, the small area being a train that they're stuck on. And two, dealing with ethics in zombie movies. The outbreak happens during the movie, and that's a genre of zombie films that I'm generally really enjoying. Not the small little outbreaks like you might have in a few, but worldwide sort of thing, or not necessarily global, but just big enough that it's not a good guys are going to win by the end scenario. It's just, how are we going to survive, and what's that going to mean for us as people? And here, it can be a little ham-fisted at times, but the whole crux of the movie is selfishness versus generosity, effectively. The dad wants his daughter to just look out for herself the whole time, and he's set against the guy whose name I forget, but he goes out of his way to help everyone. He's a big guy, and I love him in the movie. He's great. Fantastic. And you see both of them put alongside a businessman who's the biggest turd in the world. And you just want him to die. And you're so happy when he does, because screw that idiot. But it's, what are you willing to give to survive, and what are you willing to give to be someone who's worth surviving, as far as I'm concerned.
I'm willing to give up Chad Kroeger.
But Nickelback is like 5% of the Canadian economy.
We're never going to get awarded the Nickelback grant.
But I also love how foreign films can do so much with far less in their special effects budgets. There's great things that they do with smaller budgets.
It's very true. It's very true. And I haven't seen Train to Busan, but it's on my to see list.
I've seen it twice. It is good. As I said, it can be a little ham-fisted at times, not in a way that makes me dislike the movie in the slightest.
And for my next film, I'm gonna try and be a little bit more succinct. I think we're kind of getting close to running longer than we'd like, so Dunkirk. Dunkirk is the 2017 World War II film by Christopher Nolan. It is an experience. If you had the chance to see it on IMAX, that was the way to see it. This is just a really interesting movie. I didn't know a lot about Dunkirk. There's not honestly a lot going on in this movie. It's all a character piece. It's a tone poem. I gotta say, I love Tom Hardy in this movie. Cillian Murphy, very small role in this movie, but really appreciated the role that he had, and it was one of the more poignant sort of things. Hardy and Cillian Murphy, both of them. And the only complaint that I could possibly have of Dunkirk is that it just sort of ends, which perhaps, I haven't done a lot of research into the actual historical event, but perhaps that's just how Dunkirk ends. But
it doesn't end the war, so
no, I know.
There's just going to be more battles.
But yeah, I'm not sure how well it'll play just kind of at home on digital download or Blu-ray, but definitely worth checking out.
And for my penultimate film here, it is a anthology film. I am generally a huge fan of anthology films. A bunch of short little vignettes that let directors play around a little bit, just say what they got to say and get out of there. And this one is Holidays, with the shorts directed by Kevin Smith, Gary Shore, Matt Johnson, Scott Stewart, Nicholas McCarthy, Dennis Wildmere, Kevin Kolsch, Sarah Adina Smith, and Anthony Scott Burns. And of course, there's 9 segments in all that, given that there's 9 directors. But I will say that my favorite segment is the one for Easter, wherein a little girl is scared to death of the zombie. What zombie, Mom asks? That Jesus guy who comes back from the dead. That's scary, isn't it? Zombies are scary. Only to eventually wake up and find this zombie Jesus coming around that her mom assured her would not. And it goes bug fuck nuts from there, with baby chicks coming out of his stigmata, and she sees him, therefore she turns into an Easter bunny or some nonsense like that. It is weird, and I loved it. Otherwise, you've got a series of quick little horror-related shorts, and you can never really go wrong with anthologies.
You can go wrong in the sense that sometimes the anthology segments are terrible.
But you move on from that on to the next one. And that's what I love about an anthology.
Yeah, I agree. My penultimate movie, it's a movie that I totally just watched on New Year's Eve. It's The Shape of Water, Guillermo del Toro's 2017 fairy tale starring Sally Hawkins and Michael Shannon and Richard Jenkins and Doug Jones. It is a beautiful film. It's an elegant film, wonderfully put together. If I had any complaint about this film, it would be that it's almost too polished. This is a movie made by a very confident filmmaker whose only fault is perhaps that he wasn't reaching further. He wasn't really pushing himself. I feel this may be Del Toro's Grand Budapest Hotel. I feel like his next step after this will be kind of a new evolution, a new growth. If this is kind of the exclamation point at the end of a wonderful, wonderful string of beautiful and amazing films by this director, I'm happy with that. It's a wonderful movie, great performances. Richard Jenkins, anything Richard Jenkins in is great, and Michael Shannon just hits it out of the park. He knows how to play it just not quite over the top so that there's humor in the evil that he does, but it never strains your believability of it. Great effects, wonderful music, beautiful writing.
I'm personally also a big fan of Del Toro, and I've been meaning to check out basically his whole filmography lately.
It's a funny...
And it's on the list.
It's a funny complaint, but this is one of the safest Del Toro movies. To be fair, a safe Del Toro movie is still not a mainstream blockbuster hit, so it's a weak complaint. But I feel, as a Del Toro fan, as somebody who's followed his work and who cherishes so much of what he does, yeah, it was funny because you go in and you expect to have certain things poked and plucked and to be surprised, and this movie didn't surprise. It was just enjoyable, which is why I compared it to Grand Budapest Hotel, because I felt that was very much Wes Anderson's look at all the things I've learned. There you go. So definitely recommend it. Definitely, I would put it on a best of 2017 list, not just one of my favorites of 2017. So,
And speaking of safe movies...
And just before you go on, Del Toro recently tweeted that in January there will be a theater expansion for this film. It should be getting into more markets than it currently is now. So watch your listings, because this movie may be coming to a theater near you.
And speaking of safe movies, our final one, which we share, is not a safe movie.
It's the least safest movie, I think, of 2017.
2017's Mother by Darren Aronofsky.
This is a movie Dustin and I saw together.
You couldn't find anyone who'd go with you.
Damn, this movie's crazy.
The first 80% of the movie, nothing is super, super crazy. We were both working on interpretations of the film that were vastly different from each other's, but both worked. And then that 80% mark hit, and everything goes to hell. And you're just trying to keep up with everything that's happening. And I don't know if it was single shot or not, but it feels like that in my memory. It's just, you don't know what's happening.
Because it's just persistent. Well, so much of the movie is her perspective. You see either what she's seeing or you see her face. So I can see how that...
And it's slower. There's a very slow build. There's these great moments of tension where she's ready to just snap at everyone, and rightfully so. Especially friggin' Michelle Pfeiffer. Like, fuck her character. God damn, I wanted to punch her. But you definitely feel for her, and then the 80% mark hits, and she doesn't know what's going on. You don't know what's going on. And it's nothing but tension and chaos.
To be fair, throughout this entire movie, I mean, we both knew going in that there was an interpretation of the film, so we were kind of trying to figure it out as it went in real time. But you never know where this movie's going. Never. Like, there's never an indication of this is how the plot is going to unfold. This is your rising action. This is your climax. It's just... It builds and builds and builds. It's sort of the opposite of Requiem for a Dream, where the characters just sort of... There's just this, like, 45-degree angle. There's no arc. It's just the characters going down progressively. And the movie just stops when it feels like the audience can't take anymore. This one is like a 45-degree angle going up, where it just ratchets tension, and you're like, I don't know where this is going. I don't know what it's doing. And you have your ideas and your theories about what the movie is trying to say. And then, like you said, at the 80% mark, everything just goes bananas. And you're trying to, like, wrestle with what you're seeing on the screen and try and work that into the interpretation that you've been building for the whole time that you've been watching the movie. You tell yourself, oh my God, I'm going to hit Wikipedia when I get home. I need to find out what people are saying about this movie.
Because even up until that point, like, there's a story that anyone can follow.
But there's weird
a couple
enough.
Things. There's some weirdness going on, but there's definitely, it's not like Lynchian weirdness. It's just, there's something that's a little bit off, something that's not quite right.
And I think the use of the camera angle being what she sees or directly looking at her really helps
and
with
such
that.
A close camera angle too.
Yeah, it's isolating, and her character never leaves the house, and there's a lot of things that are attention is drawn to them, but you're never really told why.
It is definitely something worth checking out if you like talking about any films, if you have any interest in art house anything.
I feel like we could do a whole episode on Mother. Actually, I feel like we could do a whole episode on most of the movies that we've talked about today.
We could do a whole episode on any movie we watch ever.
Even Babylon 5 The Gathering.
Even Un Chien d'Andalou, which is on the list.
It is on the list. We will probably be covering that at some point. So that's Dustin and my top 10 favorite films of 2017, whether they were released in 2017 or not. We would love to hear what you guys have to say about the movies that we picked. Feel free to comment on our Facebook, message us on Twitter, or on our YouTube, which apparently is where most people communicate with us anyways. We're also on Instagram. You can get the show off of iHeartRadio and Stitcher. And if you get the show off of iTunes, we love it if you rate and review the show. It really helps get the show out there and get people seeing and hearing what we're talking about here. We have a Patreon account. Moving into year 3, we've got some ideas. We've got some things that we want to do. Life does get in the way, and there are things that, with a little bit of support from you guys, it would make it a lot easier just covering hosting costs and some of the extra stuff that we need to kind of hunt down and do.
And you can bet it will incentivize Mike.
So if you want to support the show, do a little extra, we've got some fun reward tiers over on patreon.com/FYC show. There's also the WordPress blog that we have. And if you like listening to the show, please feel free to share us on your social media and bring us to the attention of your family and friends. Perhaps they will like us also. And word of mouth is the
best way to do anything, really.
Yeah. So that is the end. That brings us to a close on our second anniversary show. Thank you guys so much for joining us for this episode. Thanks you so much.
Thanks for sticking around for as long as it's been, both this episode and the show itself.
I said on our first anniversary show, I never thought we would get to the end of that first year, and I was shocked that we were moving into our second year. There's a part of me that still is kind of shocked that we made it to the end of 2 years, and the weekly episodes, the regularity has really been a big thing. And moving into year 3, I'm excited. There's so many movies to watch. I've got the French Connection in my blood. I want to see the French Connection. William Friedkin.
We've got another request we got to get to.
High and low, yeah. High and low.
And we're hoping for more requests, actually. Make it easy for us to choose these films.
And we want to just keep bringing the show to you and, making this sort of channel, this discussion pod place bigger and better and more compelling and interactive. Be sure to join us next week when we'll be going back to doing a classic film, museum piece or masterpiece. Not sure which one we're going to do, but I did drop the French Connection, and lacking a better idea, we might just do that.
There you go. Done and done.
So with that, happy anniversary to us. You guys are great. Take care. I'm your host, Mike.
And I'm Dustin.
We'll see you next time on FYC.
Ta-ta. You're waffling.
I'm waffling.
Get to share. We got a waffle on our hands.